the healer who breathed life back into the Alpha's frozen heart. She was sent to mend his wounds. She discovered a soul in shards. Chapter 1. The summons arrived at midnight. Not a request. Not an invitation. A summons, written on black parchment in the sharp, economical handwriting of someone who had never in their life needed to soften a command with politeness, sealed with the crest of the Northfang pack, and delivered by a wolf who knocked on Nora Ashby's door with the particular knock of someone who already knew she had no choice but to answer. Nora was awake when it came. She was almost always awake at midnight. Sleep had not been a reliable visitor since the trial, since the night 8 months ago when she had stood in front of the Crestwood Pack's council, and heard the word disgraced attached to her name for the first time, and felt something in her chest close around it like a wound closing around a splinter. Present. Permanent. Occasionally forgotten for a few hours. Never actually gone. She opened the door. The wolf standing on her step was large, dark uniformed, and carrying the specific expression of someone executing an order they were not paid to explain. He held out the black parchment without a word. She took it. Read it once. Read it again. By order of the Northfang Pack Council, Nora Ashby, formerly of the Crestwood Healing Division, is hereby summoned to attend the Alpha's residence no later than the third morning following receipt of this notice. Her skills are required in a matter of pack urgency. Refusal is not an option that will be honored. She looked up at the messenger. The Alpha. Yes. Alpha Caius Northfang. Yes. She looked back at the parchment. Every wolf in every pack within 300 miles knew the name Caius Northfang. Knew it the way you knew the name of a storm. Not personally, not with warmth, but with the bone-deep recognition of something that had the capacity to fundamentally alter the landscape it moved through. The Ice Alpha. That was what they called him, and not affectionately. A wolf whose pack was powerful and feared, whose borders were impenetrable, whose authority was absolute, and whose personal warmth, according to every account, every rumor, every whispered story that moved through the pack networks, was precisely non-existent. She had also heard in the past month, the other story. The one that had moved through the healer networks in the careful, significant way that information moved when it was serious, and when the people sharing it were not entirely sure what to do with it. The Ice Alpha was injured. Not a battle wound. Not something that could be treated with standard pack medicine, and a week of rest. Something deeper. Something that the Northfang Pack's own healers had attempted to address and failed. And that had been getting progressively worse for 6 months. And that the council was now desperate enough about to reach outside their own borders for help. Desperate enough to summon a disgraced healer. She looked at the messenger one more time. Tell them I'll be there by the second morning, she said. She closed the door. She stood in her small, quiet house. The house she had retreated to after the trial, in the border town that was neither Crestwood nor anything else, the nowhere place she had been living in for 8 months. And held the black parchment and thought about what she was walking into. Then she went to pack her healer's kit. Welcome, beautiful people. Welcome back. If you are new here, you have arrived at exactly the right moment, because what I am about to tell you is a story about 2 broken things finding each other in the dark and discovering, slowly and painfully and against every reasonable expectation, that broken things can sometimes become something stronger than they were before they shattered. Drop a comment right now, and tell me where you are watching from. I read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because this story is going to do something to you. And you will want to be here when the next one comes. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Nora Ashby was 26 years old, and she had been the best healer in the Crestwood Pack's medical division for 3 years before the night that ended everything. She had graduated top of her cohort. She had a success record that her supervising healers had described, in formal assessments, as exceptional. She had a gift, and she knew this was not arrogance but simple accuracy, for sensing the specific nature of a wound or illness in a way that went beyond what formal training alone could produce. She felt things. Not in a mystical, unscientific way. In the way that some people are built with a finer instrument than others for a particular kind of perception. The way a musician hears things in a piece of music that a non-musician simply cannot access. She could feel, when she put her hands on a patient, the specific shape of what was wrong. This gift had made her exceptional. It had also, on one specific night 8 months ago, made her a target. But that story came later. Right now, she was packing her kit in the dark and heading north toward a man everyone was afraid of. And she was, if she was honest with herself in the particular way that late nights and black parchment summonses demanded honesty, afraid too. Not of him, exactly. Of what she might find when she got there. Chapter 2. Nora Ashby had grown up understanding that healing was not a profession. It was a calling. Her mother had been a healer. Her grandmother before that. The Ashby women had a lineage of hands that knew how to find what was wrong and make it right. A lineage that expressed itself not in formal qualifications. Though Nora had those, but in something older and less explicable that the formal qualifications had given structure to without fully accounting for. She had been a serious child. Not unhappy, serious. Focused. The kind of girl who spent her free time in the healing hall watching procedures that most children her age would have found distressing, with the calm, attentive expression of someone filing information for later use. She asked good questions. She listened to the answers completely. She practiced the techniques she was taught until they were automatic, and then kept practicing until they were instinctive, which is different, because instinct operates faster than thought, and in healing, speed matters. She had risen quickly in the Crestwood PAC's healing division. Too quickly, some of her colleagues felt, though they rarely said this directly to her face, because Nora had a quality that made indirect criticism feel more exposing than direct criticism, which was that she listened to everything and forgot nothing. She was aware of the resentment. She chose not to spend energy on it, because energy spent on resentment was energy not spent on patience, and patience were the point. She had been 25 when everything fell apart. The patient had been a senior council member's son, a young wolf named Darius who had come to the healing hall with symptoms that the attending healer had assessed as a standard fever and treated accordingly. Nora had been passing through the ward on a routine check, and had paused at his bedside without knowing why. Her gift operating below the level of conscious decision, pulling her attention to something that didn't match what she was being told. She had put her hand on his arm. She had felt it immediately. Not a fever. Something else. A specific pattern of internal dysfunction that she recognized from a text she had read 2 years ago on rare autoimmune conditions in wolfshifters, a condition that looked like fever in its early stages and that, if treated as fever, progressed rapidly to something much more serious. She had changed the treatment. Without consulting the attending healer. Without going through the formal review process that the division's protocols required for treatment changes on patients already under another healer's care. She had changed it because the formal review process took 4 to 6 hours minimum, and her assessment was that Darius had approximately 2 before the window for effective intervention closed. She had been right about the diagnosis. Darius had recovered fully, and the attending healer, whose error she had corrected, whose patient she had effectively taken over without permission, whose professional authority she had bypassed in a way that the division's council found, regardless of the outcome, to be an unacceptable breach of protocol, had filed a formal complaint. The trial had taken 3 weeks. At the end of it, the word that had been attached to her name was disgraced. Her license was suspended pending a review period of no less than 1 year. She was removed from the division. She was told that her actions, however well-intentioned, had undermined the foundational trust structure of the healing profession, and that the profession could not function if individual practitioners substituted their personal judgment for established procedure regardless of how confident they were in that judgment. She had listened to the ruling with her hands in her lap, and her face composed. She had walked out of the council chamber and into the street, and stood in the autumn air, and thought about Darius, who was alive, who had recovered fully, who had come to find her afterward and thanked her with a sincerity that had broken something in her chest in a way that the ruling itself had not. She had moved to the border town the following week. She had spent 8 months being nobody in a nowhere place, keeping her hands occupied with small legitimate work that fell within her suspended license's limited permissions, and waiting for something she could not have named to shift. And then the black parchment had arrived. Alpha Caius Northfang was 34 years old, and had been the alpha of the Northfang pack for 8 years, since his father's death in the border conflicts that had reshaped the Northern Alliance territories. He was tall, significantly so, with the build of a man whose body had been put through serious demands for a long time, and had responded by becoming something that looked less like a person and more like a structure. Dark hair, eyes the color of winter sky before snow, a gray so pale it read almost as white in certain lights, and that held, in every account Nora had read or heard, an expression of such complete emotional distance that people who encountered them directly often described the experience as unsettling in a way they couldn't fully articulate. Like looking at something that had forgotten it was supposed to feel. He had not always been this way. This was the part of the story that moved through the healer networks in those careful, significant whispers. The part that made his current condition not just a medical situation but a tragedy. People who had known Caius Northfang before the betrayal described him differently. Described a wolf who was demanding and precise, yes. He had always been those things, but who had also been capable of warmth, of loyalty expressed in action, of the kind of fierce protectiveness toward his pack that distinguished a great alpha from merely a powerful one. The betrayal had been 4 years ago. Her name was Sarah. She had been his chosen mate. Not fated, chosen, which in the wolf world meant something deliberate and weighted. A decision made with full consciousness rather than the pull of instinct. He had chosen her. Had built a future in his mind with her in it. Had trusted her with the specific, deep access trust that a person can only extend to the one they have decided to spend their life with. The trust that opens parts of a self that are not open for anyone else. She had been working the entire time for the Steelridge pack, feeding them intelligence, using his trust as a key to rooms he would never have unlocked for an enemy. When it was discovered, and it was discovered, with the particular devastating completeness of a betrayal that has been thorough enough that the evidence, once found, cannot be argued with. The damage was not just political or strategic. It was fundamental. Something in Caius Northfang had closed after Sarah. Not gradually. Not in stages. All at once, the way a door slams in a sudden wind. Complete, immediate, and loud enough that everyone in the vicinity knew something had just been shut that had previously been open. He had continued to function. More than function. He had continued to lead, to make decisions, to hold his pack's authority with the iron competence that the situation demanded. But the warmth that people who had known him before would occasionally describe had simply ceased to be present. The capacity for it appeared to have been removed, the way a fire is removed when the oxygen is taken away, leaving the structure of the thing, the logs and the grate, everything except the element that made it what it was. And now, for years later, the cold had become something physical. This was what the healer networks whispered about. What the Northfang Council was desperate about. What had caused them to reach outside their borders for a solution their own healers could not provide. The ice that had started in Caius Northfang's heart after the betrayal had, over 4 years, been spreading. Slowly. Incrementally. First the emotional cold that everyone could see. Then something deeper. A physical manifestation that the Northfang healers had observed with increasing alarm. A progressive stiffness in his movement that was not injury. A drop in his body temperature that had no physiological explanation. A gray tinge at the edges of his skin that came and went but had, in the past 3 months, been coming more than going. His own healers had a theory. They had presented it to the council with the careful language of people presenting a conclusion they could not yet prove, but that the evidence was forcing them toward. The alpha's emotional wound had become a physical one. The trauma of the betrayal, the complete, fundamental closing of his capacity to trust or feel, had over 4 years translated itself into his body, had become something his body was doing in response to something his mind had decided. He was slowly and then less slowly freezing from the inside. And the only intervention that had any theoretical basis, the only approach that might be able to reach a wound that existed at the intersection of the emotional and the physical, required a healer with the specific gift of feeling what was wrong at a level deeper than standard diagnosis could access. A healer like Nora Ashby. A healer they had disgraced. Chapter 3. She arrived at the Northfang Pack's northern residence on the second morning, as she had promised. It was not what she had expected. She had anticipated something that matched the Alpha's reputation. Cold, imposing, deliberately inhospitable. What she found was a large stone house on a hill above a valley, surrounded by old-growth trees that were losing their leaves in the early winter, with the specific quality of a place that had once been lived in warmly, and that now maintained that architecture without the warmth that had originally filled it. Like a fire that had been carefully banked. All the structure of a fire, none of the heat. She was met at the gate by a wolf named Petra, the Alpha's household manager, a compact, efficient woman in her 40s who assessed Nora in approximately 3 seconds with eyes that were professionally neutral but personally skeptical. "The healer," Petra said. "Nora Ashby. I know who you are." She turned and walked, clearly expecting Nora to follow. "I'll take you to him directly. He prefers not to be kept waiting." "What should I know before I meet him?" Nora asked, keeping pace. Petra was quiet for a moment. Then, with the careful precision of someone choosing what to share. "He will not be welcoming. He has not agreed to this. The council arranged it, not him. He considers it an intrusion. He will likely tell you that directly." She paused. Do not be put off by the cold. It is what the condition does. It is not entirely who he is. Nora noted the pause before it is not entirely who he is. Noted the specific weight in it. The weight of someone who remembered something that was no longer easily visible. Has he spoken to the other healers who came before me? She asked. Briefly, Petra said. The first one he dismissed after 10 minutes. The second lasted a day. The third, another pause. Left of her own accord after the second day. She said she had no framework for what she was observing. Nora considered this. How many in total? You are the fourth. They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door at the end of a long stone corridor. Petra knocked twice and opened it without waiting for a response, which told Nora something about the dynamics of this household. That even the closest staff operated on the assumption that waiting for invitation was not the protocol here. She stepped inside. The room was large and cold. Not unheated. There was a fire in the great stone fireplace, burning with adequate wood. But the cold in the room was not the cold of insufficient heat. It was something else. A quality of the air itself. The way the air feels in certain very old spaces. Spaces where something has been present long enough to become part of the atmosphere. Caius Northfang was standing at the window with his back to the door. He was, as every description had indicated, very tall. Broad through the shoulders in a way that the room somehow did not diminish. His hair was dark and slightly too long in a way that suggested someone who had not been paying attention to small things. He was wearing a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed to the elbows, and Nora could see, from where she stood, the faint gray at the edges of his forearms, the color she had read about, the color that should not be there. He did not turn around. They sent another one, he said. His voice was, she registered this immediately, because voice was part of her diagnostic toolkit, deep, controlled, and carrying the specific flatness of someone who had removed the emotional content from their speech with such thoroughness that it had become the default register. Not performing coldness. Simply without warmth. The way a room is without warmth when there has been no fire for a long time. My name is Nora Ashby, she said. I was summoned by your council. I'm aware. I didn't invite you. I know. A beat of silence. He still did not turn around. The others left, he said. The first one within the hour. I suggest you save yourself the time. What did you say to them? She asked. Now he turned around. His eyes were exactly as described, that pale winter sky gray, holding a distance so complete it was almost spatial. He looked at her with the assessment of someone who had been looked at many times, and had learned to see the looking as a threat to be neutralized rather than a connection to be made. I told them the truth, he said. That there is nothing to heal. That the council is managing a situation they have invented because they require me to be something I am no longer. That their concern is political rather than medical. He paused. I suggest you take note of that and arrange transport home. Nora looked at him. She had been putting her hands on patients for 6 years. She had been feeling what was wrong in people for 6 years. She was not touching him. She was across the room, with at least 10 feet between them, and she could feel it anyway. The cold was real. It was not metaphor. It was not psychological framing. It was real and it was present and it was, she felt this with the specific certainty of her gift operating without permission, getting worse. What she was sensing from across the room was the specific signature of something that had been going in one direction for a long time, and had built enough momentum that stopping it was no longer a matter of will or decision. It was going to kill him. Not dramatically, not quickly, but with the patient, incremental certainty of ice advancing, degree by degree, spreading inward, until there was nothing left that was warm enough to sustain what needed warmth to function. He had somewhere between 6 months and a year, possibly less. I'm not leaving, she said. Something moved in his expression. Not much. A micro-adjustment in the set of his jaw, a slight change in the quality of the distance in his eyes. From indifferent to something fractionally more engaged, the way a person who has been expecting a door to open to the left notices, with involuntary interest, that it has opened to the right. Everyone leaves, he said. I'm aware of my reputation, she said. And yours. And I'm still not leaving. So we can spend the next 10 minutes arguing about it, or you can tell me when you last slept more than 4 hours consecutively. A very long silence. 5 months ago, he said finally. She pulled her healer's kit from her bag. Sit down, she said. Chapter 4. He did not sit down immediately. He stood at the window and watched her set up her kit on the room's side table, with the expression of a man observing something he has not yet decided what to do with. She worked without looking at him, methodically, unhurried, arranging her instruments and materials in the specific order she always used because order and preparation produced efficiency in application, and efficiency in application produced outcomes. She could feel his eyes on her back. She could also feel, and this was the thing that was already making this different from any patient she had treated before, the cold. It moved in the room like a presence. Not uniform but radiating, with a clear center. Him. The other healers, she said, not turning around. What specifically did they do when they examined you? Standard assessment. Temperature measurement. Observation of the gray coloration. One attempted a standard warming treatment. A pause. It had no effect. Of course it had no effect, she said. A warming treatment addresses surface temperature. This isn't a surface condition. Silence. What is it then? He asked. Not challengingly. With the careful neutrality of someone who has been told several things about their own condition, and has developed a precise skepticism about all of them. She turned around. May I examine you? You want to put your hands on me. That's what examination involves, yes. He looked at her with those pale gray eyes. The other healers asked the same thing. I said no. I know. That's why they couldn't help you. She met his gaze steadily. I need physical contact to feel what's actually happening. Not surface contact. Sustained contact. She paused. I understand if that's not something you're willing to permit. But I want you to understand that without it I am as useful to you as the three who came before me. Which is to say not useful at all. The silence stretched. You said feel, he said. Not measure. Not assess. Feel. Yes. Explain that. She considered how to explain it honestly without making it sound like something it wasn't. I have a diagnostic sensitivity that operates through touch. It's not mystical. It's a heightened capacity for physiological perception. I can sense things through contact that instruments can't always measure because instruments only measure what they're designed to measure. What's happening in your body is partially outside standard measurement parameters. She paused. I need to feel where the cold is centered, how it moves, what it's connected to. What it's connected to, he repeated. Quiet. The words carrying something she couldn't fully read. A wariness, maybe. Or a recognition. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he was going to refuse again. And she was already beginning to reconstruct her approach. Then he crossed the room and sat down. Not in a chair, on the edge of the large stone hearth, which put him lower than he had been standing, which she understood was a deliberate choice. He was giving her access but not from a position of vulnerability. He was managing the terms. She noted this and accepted it. She pulled a stool to a position in front of him and sat. They were closer now, 3 feet, then 2 as she leaned forward. This close, the cold was palpable. Not imagined. She could feel it on her skin before she touched him. The way you feel the cold of ice before your hand makes contact. She reached out and placed both hands on his forearms. The cold hit her like stepping into deep water. She kept her hands where they were and breathed and let her gift do what it did. Felt through the surface cold into what was underneath it. The way you press through the surface of water to feel the current beneath. She felt the gray at his skin's edges, which was not a skin condition but a signal. The body communicating, the way bodies communicated when something was wrong at a level that surface treatment couldn't reach. She felt the stiffness that had been building in his joints. Not injury, not age, something else. Something that moved with the specific signature of a condition that was systemic rather than local. And then she felt, beneath all of it, the thing that was at the center. It was not a physical thing. Not exactly. It was, she held very still and paid very careful attention to what she was sensing. It was a wound. A real wound. As real as any she had ever treated. But located somewhere that anatomy didn't map. Somewhere between the body and whatever it was that the body expressed when it moved through the world. And connected to other things and felt them. The wound was enormous. And it was frozen. Not healed. Not infected. Not actively bleeding in the way that wounds bled in the normal sense. Simply frozen. Preserved in the exact moment it had been inflicted, for years ago, with perfect, terrible fidelity. She pulled her hands back. She sat with what she had found for a moment. He was watching her. His expression had not changed significantly. But something in the quality of his attention had shifted. from the wary, managed distance he had maintained since she walked in the door to something slightly more present. As if what had just happened had registered in him as different from what he had been expecting. Well, he said. She looked at him. The cold is real. It's not psychological, it's physiological. But the physiology is being driven by something that isn't physical in origin. She paused. You have a wound that your body has been responding to for 4 years. Your body's response has been to protect it the only way it knows how. By building cold around it. By reducing everything that could reach it, including warmth, including the things that warmth makes possible. She paused again. The problem is that the protection has become more dangerous than what it was protecting. He said nothing for a long time. You're describing a broken heart, he said. The words were flat. Dismissive. The words of a man who had heard this framework before and had decided it was insufficient. No, she said. I'm describing a wound that happens to be located where other people use that phrase. The phrase makes it sound small. What I felt is not small. She held his gaze. It is the largest wound I have ever encountered in 6 years of practice. And it is killing you. Not metaphorically. Physiologically. Your body cannot sustain this much longer. The fire crackled. He looked at her for a very long time. What would treatment involve, he said. And she told him. Chapter 5. Treatment, she explained, would not be quick. It would not be a single intervention or a course of medicine, or anything that had a clean beginning and end. What she was proposing was something more like, she searched for the right word, excavation. A careful, sustained process of accessing the wound, and creating the conditions under which it could begin, gradually, to do what wounds do when they are properly attended to. The problem was what excavation required. I need you to talk to me, she said. He looked at her with an expression that was the closest she had yet seen him come to something that might eventually become humor. If you gave it enough distance. You want to talk. I need you to let me in, she said. More precisely. Not, I don't mean the kind of talking that is performance. I don't need you to explain yourself or justify yourself or tell me things because you think I need to hear them. I mean the kind of talking that happens when a person stops managing what they're showing and simply is. She paused. That is what the wound needs to be accessed. It is frozen specifically because nothing real has reached it in 4 years. The cold is a defense. Conversation, real conversation, not managed conversation, is how we begin to get past it. You're describing intimacy, he said. The word landed in the room with a flatness that made it clear he had filed intimacy in the same category as things that no longer applied to him. I'm describing honesty, she said. They're related but not identical. He stood up and walked back to the window. She let him. She had learned in 6 years of healing that some patients needed to move when they were processing difficult things, that the body sometimes needed to be doing something simple while the mind did something hard. The last person I was honest with, he said to the window, used it against me. I know, she said quietly. He turned around. You know. Your situation isn't secret. The networks talk. She met his eyes. I know what Sarah did. I know what it cost you. And I want to be clear. I am not asking you to trust me the way you trusted her. I am not asking you to open what she damaged. I am asking you to let me sit near it. That's different. Something moved through his expression. Something she hadn't seen in it yet. Not warmth, not yet, not nearly, but a crack in the distance. A hairline fracture in the glass. Why are you here? He asked. Not rhetorically. Actually asking. You were disgraced. You have nothing to prove to the Northfang pack. You could have refused the summons. She considered giving him a professional answer, then decided against it. Because you're going to die if someone doesn't reach you, she said. And I am possibly the only person currently available who can try. She paused. And because I understand what it is to have done the right thing and have it used against you. I am not comparing what happened to me with what happened to you. They are not the same. But I understand the specific experience of having your trust turned into a weapon. And I am still here. Which I think is something. The room was very quiet. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, I sleep in the eastern room. I'll have Petra bring a chair. She blinked. What? If we are to talk, he said, with the careful precision of a man trying a word he hasn't used in a long time. The evenings are when the cold is worst. When I cannot sleep. You said sustained contact and real conversation. That suggests proximity over time. He looked at her steadily. The eastern room has the best fire. I'll have Petra bring a chair. She looked at him. All right, she said. And so it began. Not dramatically. Not with the sudden heat of two people finding each other in an instant. But with the specific, careful quality of something very cold beginning. In the presence of sufficient warmth applied with sufficient patience, to consider the possibility of thawing. Every evening for the first week, Nora sat in the chair Petra had brought to the eastern room, and Caius sat in the chair across from her, and they talked. Or rather, he spoke, carefully, minimally, with long pauses between sentences that she learned to respect rather than fill, and she listened with the full quality of attention she brought to everything important. And occasionally she asked a question. And occasionally he answered it in a way that was more than the minimum. And occasionally those answers went somewhere that neither of them had entirely planned. She kept physical contact brief and purposeful in these early sessions, a hand on his forearm during the examination portions, feeling the cold, mapping its movement, tracking any change. The changes were small in the first week. Incremental. The kind of changes that required a practiced sensitivity to detect, and that she documented carefully in the notes she kept every night after he had retired. The gray at his skin's edges did not recede in the first week, but it stopped advancing. This was, as she wrote in her notes at the end of day 7, significant. Chapter 6. Day 12 brought the first crisis. She had been woken at 3 in the morning by Petra, not knocking, opening the door, which told her the urgency, and been brought to the eastern room to find Caius on the floor beside his bed. Not unconscious. Aware, and fighting it. She could see that immediately, the specific quality of someone using every available resource to stay present against something that was pulling hard in the other direction. The cold in the room was the worst she had felt since her first day. Worse actually. An active cold. A cold with direction and force, emanating from him with an intensity that dropped the room temperature physically. She could see her own breath. She crossed the room without hesitation, and got down on the floor beside him. I'm here, she said. His eyes found her face. The pale gray of them was almost white in the firelight. Whatever color the condition was draining from him, it was taking it from his eyes too. It's moving faster, he said. His voice was stripped of its usual control. Not from emotion but from the effort of managing what was happening in his body. I can feel it. It's moving faster than it was. I know, she said. I can feel it too. She put both hands on his chest, directly over where she had first sensed the wound. Not the heart precisely, but close to it. The cold hit her with a force that made her own hands ache immediately. A deep tissue ache that moved up her forearms. She held on. Talk to me, she said. Whatever is in your mind right now. Don't manage it. Just whatever is there. A pause. His breathing was shallow. She could feel the cold pressing against her hands like a physical force. I keep thinking about the morning I found out, he said. Quietly. Stripped down. The way people's voices go when they are too exhausted to maintain the distances they normally keep. Not about her. I processed her. What she did, why she did it. I understand it now in a way I didn't at the time. He paused. I keep thinking about the morning after. When I woke up and the pack needed an alpha and I got up and I was one. And I thought, I will do this without the parts of myself that allowed this to happen. I will be more functional without them. More effective. Less vulnerable. You thought closing everything down was a choice, she said. It was a choice. It was, she agreed. And it worked. For a while. She kept her hands where they were, pushing warmth through them with everything she had. But you can't close down selectively. You can't remove the capacity to feel pain without removing the capacity to feel everything else. And the parts of you that you closed down, they didn't disappear. They're still there. Frozen. And they are trying to. She pressed her hands more firmly, felt the cold push back against her, felt it and didn't move. They are trying to be felt. That's what the cold is. That's what's happening right now. The parts of you that you sealed off are pushing against the seal. His breathing changed. She felt it under her hands. What happens if they get through, he said. Then you feel them, she said. That's all. You feel them. And it will hurt. And you will not die from it. And you will be, on the other side of it, something your body can actually sustain. You can't know that, he said. I know it the way I know everything I know about wounds, she said. From having been close to enough of them to understand what they need. A long silence. She held on. The cold was immense and it was pressing against her and her hands were deeply, genuinely aching. But she held on because he needed something on the other side of the cold that was warm enough and steady enough and committed enough to stay. I had a dog, he said. When I was 7. His name was Flint. He was enormous and mostly useless as a working animal, and I loved him more than I have loved most things since. He paused. He died when I was 12. I cried for 2 days. My father said it was good practice. That loss was going to be a part of my life as an alpha and I should learn to process it efficiently. He paused again. I was 12. Nora held on. I think about Flint sometimes, he said. When the cold is very bad. I don't know why. Because Flint is on the other side of the seal, she said quietly. Along with everything else you closed off. He's there with it. When the seal weakens, he comes close. A very long silence. And then something happened that she had not expected on day 12. Something she had hoped for, but had placed much further in the future of this process. Given where they had started. He wept. Not loudly. Not dramatically. In the quiet, controlled way of a man who has not done this in 4 years, and whose body has remembered how before his mind gave permission. Tears that came with the specific quality of something that has been held under enormous pressure for an enormous amount of time and has found, finally, the smallest possible crack. She kept her hands where they were. She said nothing. She stayed. The cold in the room dropped by 2 degrees that she measured later. 2 degrees in one night. She wrote it in her notes at 5 in the morning with hands that still ached and a chest that felt, strangely, both heavier and lighter than it had the previous evening. Day 12. Crisis episode. Duration. 2 hours and 40 minutes. Outcome. First emotional release observed. Cold measurement. Reduced by 2 degrees at peak. Patient status. Stable. Notes. The wound is not getting worse. The wound is beginning for the first time to know it is not alone. Chapter 7. 3 weeks in, something shifted. Not the cold. The cold was still present, still measurable, still the primary clinical concern. But something in the quality of the space between them had changed in a way that she noticed and documented and was careful, very careful, about how she interpreted. He had started looking for her. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way he would have acknowledged or perhaps even recognized in himself. But Nora was observant in the specific way that healers who paid attention to everything were observant. And she noticed that he turned toward the sound of her footsteps in the corridor before she entered a room. That in their evening sessions, the long pauses between his sentences had shortened. Not because he was saying less, but because something in the silence had changed its quality, become less defended and more simply quiet. That when she arrived each morning, he was already in the room they had designated for examinations. Which meant he had come there before she arrived, which meant he had been expecting her. She noticed. She was careful about what she did with what she noticed. Because she was also doing something she had not planned and had not, in her professional framework, any good category for. She sat with this on day 19 and looked at it honestly. She was becoming attached to him. Not in the way that attachment is romanticized. In the specific, grounded way that happens when you spend 3 weeks sitting close to someone's most broken place and holding on while they feel it, and you discover in the process who the person is underneath the wound. He was not what his reputation said. This was not a surprise. Reputations were always reductions. But the specific gap between the reputation and the reality was larger than she had expected. The ice alpha. The man with nothing left inside. The cold, unreachable predator. The man she was sitting with every evening was precise, yes. Demanding, yes. Capable of a bluntness that could make a lesser prepared person step back. But also, genuinely curious in a way that expressed itself in the questions he asked her. About her work and her methods and the cases she had treated, and the things she had learned. Loyal, in the specific way that people who don't extend loyalty easily are loyal once they extend it. She had observed this in how he spoke about his pack, the wolves he was responsible for, the decisions he carried and the weight he was clearly still carrying them with even through the cold. And occasionally, in the spaces between the difficulty, something else, a quality of attention he brought to the evenings that was not clinical or managed or defended. It was present. He was, when he allowed himself to be, entirely present. She was careful. She was professional. She was aware that what was happening between them was happening in a context of significant power differential and significant vulnerability. He was her patient, she was his healer, and the intimacy of what they were doing was a function of the treatment, and she was not going to mistake treatment intimacy for something it might not be. She was careful. And then one evening on day 23 he said, "Tell me what happened at the trial." She had not told him. She had mentioned it, briefly, in the context of her own experience with trust being used against her, but she had not told him the story. She looked at him across the evening fire and considered. "Darius," she said. And told him. All of it. The fever that wasn't a fever. The choice she had made. The protocol she had bypassed. The outcome, Darius alive and recovered. And the ruling, disgraced, suspended, removed. He listened with the full quality of his attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "They punished you for being right. They punished me for bypassing protocol." Which I did. Because following protocol would have killed him. "Yes. And the healer whose error you corrected, what happened to them?" She looked at him. "Nothing," she said. "Their error was within protocol. Errors within protocol are not punishable offenses." Something moved in his expression. A system that punishes correct judgment and protects incorrect judgment, because the incorrect judgment followed the approved form. "Is a system protecting its own authority?" she said. "Yes. I know." "You're not angry," he said, observing it rather than questioning it. "I was," she said. "For a long time. I've moved through it to something else. I still believe I made the right call. I still believe Darius would have died if I hadn't. And I also," she paused, "I also understand that systems need to function. And systems that allow any individual to override collective procedure on the basis of personal certainty, even correct personal certainty, have a problem. I broke something real in breaking that protocol. Even though I was right." She looked at him. Holding both of those things at once is uncomfortable. But it's honest. He looked at her for a long time. "You are the most honest person I have been in a room with in 4 years, he said. She felt the weight of that. "Then you have been in the wrong rooms," she said. Something happened in his face. Not a smile, not quite. But the shape of something that had once known what a smile was and was beginning, tentatively, to remember. She felt the temperature in the room. It was the warmest it had been since she arrived. Chapter 8. The crisis came on day 31. Not a physical crisis this time. Not the floor, not the cold pressing outward with that active, directed force. A different kind. The kind that arrives when a process of excavation reaches the center of what it has been working toward. And the center is exactly as difficult as everything leading up to it suggested it would be. She had been conducting an examination, the daily physical assessment, hands on his forearms, reading the cold, mapping the change. The changes had been consistent over the past week. Incremental but real, the gray receding slightly at the edges, the temperature measurably warmer than day 1. Progress. And then he said, without preamble, without apparent plan. She said she loved me. Nora kept her hands where they were. Kept her breathing even. Kept everything steady. "Sarah," he said. "Yes," she said. She said it every day. For 3 years. His voice was completely controlled. The control of a man who had decided to say something and was going to say it with precision or not at all. I believed her. I believed every instance of it. And she was lying. Every time. For 3 years. There was no version of what she said to me that was true. It was entirely constructed. Entirely performed. He paused. "I do not understand how a person does that. I have spent 4 years not understanding how a person does that." "You've been trying to understand it," she said. "If I can understand it, I can protect against it," he said. "If I know the mechanism." "You can't protect against it," she said quietly. "That's not how it works. You can protect against specific people, specific situations, specific recognizable patterns. You cannot build a system that prevents you from ever being deceived by someone who has decided to deceive you completely, and is willing to sustain that over years." She paused. "The question is not how to make yourself invulnerable. The question is how to be vulnerable in a way that is worth the risk." A long silence. "Is it," he asked, "worth the risk?" She held his gaze. "I think you already know the answer to that," she said. "I think the reason the wound is still frozen is not because you don't know the answer. It's because the answer is yes, and yes is terrifying." Something in the room changed. The cold, she felt it shift. Not recede. Change in quality. The way a weather system changes not by diminishing, but by moving into a different phase. The static, defended cold of the past 30 days becoming something more dynamic. More turbulent. He stood up. Not to leave. She could feel that. could feel the direction of the energy, which was not toward the door but toward something more difficult. He walked to the window, stood there, then turned around. I don't know how to, he started. Stopped. Started again. 4 years ago I knew how to do this. I knew how to. He stopped again with the specific frustration of someone trying to describe a skill they used to have and finding the description unavailable because the skill itself is unavailable. I knew how to be with someone. I don't know if I still. You've been doing it for 31 days, she said. He looked at her. What we have been doing in this room, she said carefully, is being with someone. That is what it is. It is not the full version of it. We are healer and patient, and that is the primary context, and I am not. I am not pretending that isn't true. But what you have been practicing, every evening, is exactly what you're saying you've lost. You haven't lost it. She paused. You froze it. And it has been thawing. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. He was close enough that the cold, still present, still real, still the thing she was treating, was immediately palpable. But beneath it, and this was new, this was the change she had been working toward for 31 days, beneath the cold was something else. Something that had been there all along, sealed under 4 years of ice. And that was now, not freed, not yet, but pressing against the seal with the specific, unmistakable warmth of something that had been waiting to be felt for a very long time. You stayed, he said. Not gratitude, observation. The observation of a man for whom the staying was itself a data point of enormous significance. I stayed, she said. Why? She looked at him. At the pale gray eyes that had been, for 31 days, showing her, in increments so small they required attention to track, the slow return of something that had been taken away. Because the wound is real, she said. And because the person carrying it is worth staying for. She paused. And because I told you at the beginning, I understand what it is to have your trust turned into a weapon. And I am not going to become another instance of that. I am going to be the evidence that the other kind is still possible. He reached out. Not quickly. Not impulsively. With the careful deliberateness of a man who has thought about a movement before making it, and has decided to make it anyway. He put his hand against the side of her face. The cold of it hit her immediately. His skin still ran cold. The condition was not resolved. She was still his healer, and this was still a process underway. But beneath the cold, under it, pressed against her cheek with the tentative, enormous quality of something that has been sealed for 4 years and is, for the first time, being allowed to be what it is. Warmth. Real. Unmistakable. Is. She put her hand over his and held it there. In the fireplace, the fire, which had been burning at a steady low level all evening, suddenly burned higher. In the morning, she conducted the standard examination. The gray at the edges of his skin. She checked every measurement point she had documented since day 1, carefully, without allowing the previous night to alter her clinical precision, because he was still her patient and that was still the primary truth. The gray had receded by 30% overnight. She sat with her notes and her measurements and the specific, grounded joy of a healer who has watched something that was going in one direction reverse itself. And she let herself feel it completely before she put her professional face back on and went to find him. He was in the main hall, standing at the window again. His default position she had come to understand, for mornings when there was something significant to be processed. But the quality of his standing was different. Not the controlled, defended stillness of the man she had met on day 1. Something that had. She noted this with the same precision she noted the gray receding. Opened fractionally and unmistakably, in the set of his shoulders. He heard her and turned around. 30%, she said. He looked at her for a moment. 30%. In one night. She paused. That is the largest single session change since I arrived. Something moved through his expression. Not a smile yet, not quite, but the territory adjacent to one. What does that mean for the prognosis? It means, she said carefully, that the treatment is working. And that if the rate continues, and I have no guarantee that it will, this is medicine not mathematics, you have a realistic path to full recovery. She paused. It will take time. It will not be a straight line. There will be harder nights. She held his gaze. But the direction has changed. You are not freezing anymore. You are thawing. He looked at her for a long time. Stay, he said. Not as a medical request. As something else entirely. Something that came from the place she had spent 31 days working to reach. She looked at him. I was planning to, she said. Chapter 9. The full recovery took 4 months. Not 4 months of crisis and drama. 4 months of the steady, incremental, unglamorous work that actual healing required. Daily examinations. Evening conversations that moved through territory that got progressively less defended as the weeks passed. Physical contact that shifted, slowly and with full mutual consciousness, from purely clinical to something that existed in the space where clinical and personal overlapped, and then beyond that space into something that was simply its own thing. The gray receded. Measurably, documentably, at a pace that Nora tracked with the precision she brought to everything, because she was still his healer and the healing was still real and the data mattered. By the end of the 2nd month, it was at the edges only. By the end of the 3rd, it required close examination to find. By the end of the 4th, Petra, who had been the first person to observe it appearing, who had watched it spread for 2 years with increasing alarm and decreasing ability to do anything about it, could not find it at all. His temperature normalized. His sleep, which had not exceeded 4 consecutive hours in 5 months when Nora arrived, extended gradually to 6, then 7, then on the best nights 8. He told her about these mornings with the specific, slightly wondering quality of a man rediscovering something he had forgotten was possible. The stiffness in his joints resolved, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks that she documented and managed, and that he bore with the controlled determination of someone who had decided to do this, and was not going to be deterred by the difficulty of it. And the cold in the room. The quality of the air that Petra and the household staff had lived with for 2 years, that had become so normalized they had stopped consciously noticing it, and only recognized its absence when it began to change, lifted. Degree by degree. Week by week. By the end of the 4th month, the eastern room was warm. The Northfang Pack's council convened for a formal assessment on the 123rd day of Nora's residence. They had been receiving her reports throughout. She had insisted on this, both as professional protocol, and because she was not going to allow her work or his progress to be invisible to the people responsible for his pack. And they were, as groups go, cautiously pleased. The kind of pleased that powerful people allow themselves when something has gone better than expected, and they are not entirely sure what to do with that. The head councilwoman, a sharp-eyed wolf named Delia who had been managing Caius's council for 8 years and who had, she informed Nora during one of their intermediary conversations, been the primary advocate for reaching outside their borders for help. Looked at the assessment documentation with the care of someone who understood what they were reading. Full recovery, she said. Full recovery, Nora confirmed. And the prognosis going forward? The wound is healed, Nora said. Not closed healed. That distinction matters. A closed wound can reopen. A healed wound has rebuilt the tissue. The cold will not return as long as the conditions that allowed the healing to occur are maintained. She paused carefully. Delia looked at her with the eyes of a woman who understood the pause completely. As long as he is not alone again, she said. Yes, Nora said. As long as that. On the evening of day 123, after the council had departed and the formal assessment was complete and the household had returned to its evening routines, Nora sat in the eastern room. Her chair, the one Petra had brought on the first week, which had at some point stopped being a practical provision, and become simply where she sat, and Caius sat across from her. The fire was warm. The room was warm. The air held none of the quality it had held when she first walked in. Nothing emanating, nothing pressing, nothing that made itself known as the signature of something wrong. He was looking at the fire. She was looking at him. The council was satisfied, he said. They were. They'll want to know about next steps. Whether you intend to remain in an official capacity or... Caius, she said. He looked at her. What do you want, she asked. Simply. The question she had been waiting for the right moment to ask directly. He looked at her for a long time. With those eyes that had been, when she first arrived, the pale, distant gray of winter sky before snow. And that were now, she had watched this change too, had documented it in notes that nobody but her would ever read, something warmer. Not a different color. The same gray, but inhabited differently, looked out from differently, the eyes of a person who is present in them rather than behind them. I want you to stay, he said. Not as a patient to a healer. Not as an alpha to a useful resource. I want the evenings. I want the conversations. He paused, and she watched him do the thing he had been learning for 4 months, which was to let the thing he actually wanted to say arrive without managing it into something safer. I want to know what you think about everything. I want to be in the same room as you. He stopped. I am significantly better at this than I was 4 months ago, and I am aware that this is still not very articulate. She smiled. Fully. The kind of smile that she had not produced in this house for a long time, because the house had not previously been a place where full smiles arrived naturally. It's the most articulate thing you've said in 4 months, she said. And I'll tell you what I think about everything. Starting now. He looked at her. Something in his face completed. The way a structure completes when the last piece is placed. Not finished, not static, but whole in the way that things are whole when they contain everything they are supposed to contain. Your license, he said. The suspension. The review period. Ends in 4 months, she said. For months, he repeated. And then I'll have options, she said. I'll consider them carefully. Would one of the options be? Yes, she said. Before he finished. One of the options would be. The fire crackled. The room held its warmth without effort, the way rooms do when the source of the cold is gone. 8 months later, the Crestwood Pack's disciplinary council received a formal communication from the Northfang Pack Alliance office. It was signed by Alpha Caius Northfang, and countersigned by all 7 Northfang council members. It requested the formal review and reinstatement of Nora Ashby's healing license, citing the documented outcome of her treatment of the Alpha, and including a detailed clinical report that demonstrated, with the precision that Nora had brought to everything, the nature of the condition, the methodology of the treatment, and the results. It also included a personal letter from Darius, the young wolf whose life Nora had saved 8 months before her suspension, who had been trying to find a way to say what needed to be said through official channels ever since, and who had, upon hearing about the Northfang request, written something that the council later admitted was the most compelling character testimony they had received in living memory. The review took 3 weeks. At the end of it, Nora's license was reinstated. Fully. Without conditions. With a formal acknowledgement that the original suspension had been. The council's language was careful here, as council's language always was. An application of protocol that, upon further review, did not fully account for the clinical complexity of the situation. She read the reinstatement letter sitting on the steps of the Northfang residence, in the early spring sun, with the sound of the pack's daily life moving around her. The training grounds, the market, the specific comfortable noise of a community that was, she had come to know over the past months, genuinely well led and genuinely cared for by the man responsible for it. She heard his footsteps behind her. She held up the letter, without turning around. He sat down beside her on the step and read it. Reinstated, he said. Fully, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, options. Options, she agreed. Have you considered them? She turned to look at him. At the gray eyes that were warm now in the way that gray could be warm. The gray of early morning light rather than winter sky before snow. At the face that had, over 8 months, become as familiar to her as her own hands. I've considered them, she said. And the Northfang Pack, she said, has no designated pack healer at the senior level. The position has been vacant for 2 years. She paused. It would be a significant role. Complex. Demanding. Another pause. Interesting. It would be, he said. The Alpha is, she considered her words, known to be difficult. Extremely, he agreed. Cold, by many accounts. She looked at him. Not anymore, she said. And the smile that crossed his face, slow, real, slightly wondering, like something returning from a long absence to find the place it left still there and still waiting, was the warmest thing she had felt since she arrived. Which was saying something. Because she had arrived in winter. And it was spring now. On the wall of the Northfang Pack's healing hall, newly established, properly staffed, under the direction of the pack's new senior healer, a small framed piece of text had been placed. Not official. Not ceremonial. Something Petra had made and put there without asking anyone. Because Petra had been in this house for 12 years and had watched the cold arrive, and had watched it leave and felt strongly that the record should reflect both. It read, some wounds are too deep for standard treatment. Some healers are exactly as disgraced as the system that disgraced them. And some frozen things, given sufficient warmth and sufficient time, become the warmest things of all. The Eastern Room, winter to spring. Thank you for being here for this story. If something in it moved you, leave a comment below. Tell me which moment stayed with you longest. Was it Nora putting her hands on him for the first time, and feeling the wound beneath the cold? Was it the night on the floor, Flint, and the tears that finally came? Was it him standing at the window and saying stay, Not as a patient but as something else entirely? Or was it the spring morning on the steps? And the smile returning from a long absence? Tell me. I read every single one. Subscribe and hit the bell. A new story comes every week. Stay warm. Stay brave. And remember, some frozen things become the warmest things of all. The end.